I'm joined now by Dr. Ira Nadel, professor of English at the University of British Columbia and the author of Double Act, A Life of Tom Stoppard. His other books include Biography, Fiction, Fact and Form, Various Positions, A Life of Leonard Cohen, and David Mamet, A Life in the Theater. Welcome, Ira.
Thank you very much, Susan.
I'd like to begin by discussing the nature of biography in relation to Stoppard. In your book, you discuss Stoppard's own skepticism of a biographer's ability to recreate his subject's past accurately.
Okay, well, the wonderful thing about trying to write about Tom Stoppard is his distrust of biography, because I think he believes quite rightly biography, like a play or certainly a work of fiction, is constructed, and it's a narrative. And everyone will have their own narratives and their own approach to kind of what is the life. And what he worries about is that people who read a biography, and there should never be just one biography about a figure, are going to take it as fact. But it's really interpretation. And I think that's where he starts from, this recognition that biography is a fiction as much as any other kind of constructed expression in language.
What was his verdict upon reading your book?
He thought it was incredibly long.
Did he feel it was accurate?
Well, in a certain way. I think that he made some particular comment to the press where he talked about, it's inherently filled with question marks or something of that sort.
What does it mean to say something is Stoppardian?
It's witty, it's quick, it will not let you go to sleep, it'll challenge you intellectually, and it deals with ideas. And these are ideas that can run from the function of an algorithm in culture to what does it mean to be a revolutionary in 19th century Russia.
I'd like to turn now to Arcadia. In speaking of Arcadia, Stoppard said, "I feel for once that I stumbled on a really good narrative idea. Arcadia has got a classical kind of story, and whether we are writing about science or French maids, this whole thing is about storytelling first and foremost." Would you agree?
Oh, yes, definitely. But what he's really doing is telling two stories, because you have this overlap of time where you have part of it set in the present and part of it at the beginning of the 19th century again, in the beginning of the Romantic period. And this is a gigantic metaphor about how experience is whole, how it's unified, how it's connected. It can take different forms, of course, and that is what's represented by the gardens and the garden metaphor that's used in the play. The garden is what actually links the two time periods. We connect them, but the characters don't understand the connections. Although, of course, you have Bernard, doing his wonderful research on Byron and trying, this great misunderstanding. I mean, Stoppard, by the way, to come back to our original question about biography, is wonderfully skeptical and critical of academics. And so he's got science versus literary criticism. And literary criticism is the big loser in this particular play, because literary critics tend to seize on a single incident and build an entire edifice around it. And then he reveals, of course, at the end of the play, which is part of the comedy, how entirely wrong and overdetermined Bernard is in terms of his interpretation of Byron. That's Stoppard. He questions all of the time.
Arcadia makes brilliant use of complex science, mathematics, physics, woven into its story, its structure, and its dialogue. I gather Stoppard wasn't brilliant at science as a schoolboy. When did he become interested in it? And how did he educate himself enough to sound so comfortable, so at ease with these ideas?
He's so conscious of developments, changes in the world around him on every cultural level. That's where he begins, that kind of awareness. Number two is his acceptance. He's entirely ignorant about how did this actually happen and, how does one understand this? And so he moves then to level 3, which is, who are the experts? I'm going to talk to them. And he makes a very strenuous effort to get in touch with the people who are leading in the fields. And what's interesting about Stoppard and his mind is the way in which he is a kind of filter through which all of this specialized knowledge passes through and then comes out dramatically and narratively on the stage. He's not writing a novel here. He's writing a play, which means he's got to have characters who feel this work emotionally and intellectually, who have issues, who have their own personal hang-ups, who don't like to get up early in the morning or whatever it happens to be. And that's where the magic comes in, I think, is that it's as though you had a set of encyclopedias, and these encyclopedias deal with all the themes and subjects that he wants to understand. And then he turns around and moves in a different direction, and the next thing you see are 6 characters or 8 characters on the stage who express all these ideas convincingly and humanly.
I think only in relation to a Stoppard play would I be asking this question. I want to go back to the significance of landscape gardening and how it intersects with chaos theory.
Well, I suppose the simple answer to that is the change that's happened in landscape gardening from the 18th century to the beginning of the 19th, as you moved from the order and regularity of what a garden is to represent, and it's a physical expression of the mind, if you will, into the romantic conception of landscape and nature as being irregular. And I don't want straight lines. I don't want straight walks in my garden. I want people to get lost. And this is the way in which you move out of the 18th century Age of Enlightenment into the Romantic period, with the focus is on the individual and the self. And Valentine in the play talks about how gardening, particularly contemporary gardening, links to mathematics when he says the unpredictable and the predetermined unfold together to make everything the way it is. It's how nature creates itself on every scale. That's what gardening is representing. It's both the predetermined and the unpredictable. So it's a perfect metaphor for Stoppard and for Arcadia. And you sort of sit there and say, why didn't I think of that? Why haven't others, kind of treated it in this particular way? It's part of the great, if I could use the term, genius of Arcadia.
How does chaos theory relate to Stoppard's smoking habits?
Well, it has everything to do with the way the smoke travels up from the cigarette and the idea of scale, which is instrumental in terms of chaos theory. The butterfly, flapping its wings in a tropical climate, creating a hurricane in the east coast of the United States. I mean, it's that sort of trying to measure the unpredictable. That's what chaos theory is concentrating on, and that's what I think Stoppard's plays are doing, trying to measure and express personally as well as historically and intellectually and politically the unpredictable.
Talk about the significance of the original version of Arcadia's title, which was Et in Arcadia Ego.
Well, it's actually discussed in the play. The characters take that on, and that's because there is double meaning in terms of that particular phrase. It's a famous painting by Poussin. It has different interpretations. It means that I too am in Arcadia. That is to say, these in the famous painting, the shepherds come upon a grave stone in what looks like this idyllic classical world and setting, and that's what they read. That's the inscription. And so you can read it as though the individual deceased and buried there is saying, but I too am in a better world. I'm in a kind of paradise. Or it can be read that you too are in a kind of idyllic, timeless, Eden-esque world right now. The difference is you're alive, I'm dead. And so I think what Stoppard is doing is using the term Arcadia ironically, because neither the world of Septimus and Thomasina, nor the Hannah and Bernard, the contemporary characters, are in an idyllic world by any stretch of the imagination. He's questioning whether it's possible for anyone to be in Arcadia.
And I assume that the changing by mere mortals of the landscape design is also a comment on our attempts to manipulate reality.
Well, yes, it's a question of we want to feel we're in some form of control, but in the end we're probably not. But Stoppard would say it's the attempt that matters. It's trying that counts. What you must avoid is just accepting what is. You try as energetically and enthusiastically as possible to shape your own world. And this is partly the Septimus-Thomasina relationship, because she's trying to shape her own world. She's trying to understand, right? Carnal embrace, the opening of the play. She's trying to understand, and she does understand this very important, kind of mathematical theory, but how? Expressed through rice pudding. My imagined ideal production of this play, Arcadia, is that everyone coming into the theater gets a little cup of rice pudding and a spoon with, of course, some jam. And before the play begins, you get this sort of voice coming from backstage saying, now stir your rice pudding, So you can actually experience what she talks about. And it's an interesting concept of time's arrow about everything moving forward, and you can't go backward. If you stir backward, the jam will not come together again. That's Stoppard. A small, simple thing like rice pudding holds a universe.
Well, thank you so much, Ira. This has been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much, Susan.
I've been talking with Dr. Ira Nadel, professor of English at the University of British Columbia and the author of Double Act, A Life of Tom Stoppard.